Now I'd like to talk about the law. I wish two things. I wish that I had the opportunity to say this to every parent in the world. I wish I could say this to every parent alive. And I almost as much wish that somebody had said this to me just before Bruce was born, our oldest son. I wish somebody had said this to me. And I feel privileged to be able to say it to you. I'd like to talk about the law. I'd like to talk about the law in the huge sense. The law in capital letters, the law in capital letters and italics, the law in capital letters, italicized, underlined, the law in the giant sense, the law in the sense of the Judean law, the law in the sense of the Christian law, the law in the sense of the Napoleonic Code, the law in the sense of the common law. I mean the law in the highest sense. It makes for such a sane household. You know, I'd like to propose a good way to bring the law into your home. When I talk to about the law to parents, especially the parents of hurt children, but it's also true about the parents of well children, most parents are inclined to say, "Oh, listen, you don't have to tell us about this, but we beat him every Thursday, whether he needs it or not. That's you know, we beat him regularly. It's you know, it's a shame that some people have made certain wonderful words into bad words. Words like discipline and behavior. If you say discipline to a parent, they almost always get out the whip to prove they've got one, and to beat everybody with it. Behavior. When you say behavior, everybody thinks of bad behavior, misbehavior. How about good behavior? These are elegant words that have been made bad words, and it's a great, great, great sadness. Let's take the word discipline. Let me tell you an interesting story. I think I mentioned to you all before Bill Jones, the guy who does such incredible teaching of kids in inner cities. In 4 sessions, has 12-year-olds doing advanced mathematics after 4 one-hour periods with him. He's brilliant. He teaches absolutely Socratically. Absolutely. You have to know a great deal about a subject to teach it totally Socratically. He doesn't say anything. He just asks questions and leads kids to the most brilliant answers. You'll see some of it this week. When Bill Jones first came here, Bill Jones is a mathematician, and he lives in California, and he read the math book. So one day he arrived at the institutes unannounced and said, "Where's the guy who wrote this book? I want to talk to him." And I was away somewhere, and so Gretchen chatted with him. It took us 2 years to get together. When we finally got together, it was in Washington, and I shall never forget it. It was in a hotel, and on the stage in the auditorium of the big hotel, there were 2 tables set up in a V, and behind the desks behind these tables, as if they were desks facing the audience with cards like this, there were 18 black children. Bill Jones had seen them. He had gone into a Washington school 4 days before this, taken a group of kids, all from the inner city, all black, all poor as church mouse, and had spent 1 hour a day for 4 days. And this was the 4th day. And the audience was entirely composed of executives from huge companies, a vice president, SO, several senators from the United States Senate, a couple of representatives, mostly big business, and then 4 of us from the staff. And I remember I'd never met him, but it took 2 years to get to this point. Anyway, he walked onto the stage and he said, "Children." And when he said children, the 18 hands all went up in the air. They didn't know what the subject was yet, but 18 hands went up, and he said, what will be the subject today? And the children said exponentiation. One of the children, he picked on one of the waving hands, exponentiation. And he said, what base shall we use? And males said, 2. And in 5 minutes, they were doing mathematics that I didn't even come close to understanding. Not even close. Then he turned to the audience and said, now, watch them carefully. Remember, these were senators and vice presidents of huge corporate. Watch them carefully in case they make any mistakes. Then he turned back to the kids and said, now their hearts are beating very fast for fear we'll ask them a question. And that was the absolute truth. He did it superbly. Superbly. When it was over during the question period, he said, well, are there any questions? And I raised my hand and said, you know, if you were the king and could do anything you want, what would you do? I mean, what would you do to put this everywhere? And he said to the audience, I'm not sure, but if the man asking that question is who I think he is, and you think I'm crazy, you ought to talk to him. He teaches 1-year-olds to do math, said he. Anyway, it took us another year to get together here. When he came here, he said, I can stay for 1 day. If I stretch it, I can stay for 3 days. And then he stayed for 6 weeks. He became fascinated with the institutes. I mean, aside from the children. He's interested in organization. At the end of 3 days, he sat down with me and he said, you know, I have never in my life seen an organization that operates the way this one does. And I'm fascinated by organizations. And he said, I just never saw anything like it. And I said, what do you find unusual? And he said, well, when you people decide something's going to happen, it happens. And I said, doesn't it anywhere? And he said, oh, God, no. It almost never does. And he said, that's because of the staggering discipline you have here. And he said, I must understand that. So, what he did was he followed me around for a week. And he decided that I didn't run things because I never told anybody to do anything. Then he followed Janet around for a week, and he decided she didn't run the place because she never told anybody to do anything. Then he followed Douglas around for a week. Then he followed Bob Durr around for a week. Then he followed Gretchen around for a week. At the end of that time, he said, I give up. Who runs the place? He said, how do you maintain such staggering discipline here? Staggering discipline. And that's right. And we do have staggering discipline. It's the only kind of discipline that there is in the world, of course. You understand, it's self-discipline. Every individual here is self-disciplined. Everybody, you can't quite tell what anybody's job is around here. For instance, Gretchen walks around a great deal of time picking up those plastic cups that people throw around the grounds, which she hates with a passion. She says that when she dies and goes to hell, she's going to be put to work throughout eternity making those cups for people to throw around the grounds. Now, you know, the director going around picking up cups, who does what? The thing is that everybody here feels responsible for everything here. There is no other kind of discipline except self-discipline. It's the only kind there is. I mean, you can beat me into something or bully me into something, but that isn't discipline. I mean, that's beating me or bullying me. It's only I can discipline me. And discipline is a good word, not a bad word. And we're going to be talking about that. Behavior. Every time you say behavior, everybody thinks of misbehavior. How about good behavior? What about it? These are the things we're going to talk about in 2 periods about the law and children, the law and your house. In this huge sense, you know that we human beings need the law. We human beings invented the law. We invented it because we're bright and we're human beings, and we invented the law. Law is the sign of civilization. Do you remember in the old days, only 120 years ago, you remember about out west, west of the Pecos, no law west of the Pecos? Smile when you say that, stranger. That meant if you say something insulting, you better smile to prove you're joking, or I'll fire a warning shot through your heart to warn you that you're upsetting me. You know, either that's the law or the law is the law. And civilization, well, I was going to say civilization has followed the law. I suppose law has followed civilization, or one or the other. What is the law at its best? Well, it is the purpose of the law at its best, in the highest sense, is to give me absolute, total, complete freedom without stepping on yours, okay? Without in any way interfering with yours. and to give you absolute, total, complete freedom without you stepping on mine. I mean, it is to protect ourselves from each other in a highly civilized way. Don't you think? You know, very often when you say to parents, especially parents of tiny children, you can't discipline tiny children, or we beat them every Tuesday. That seems opposite sides to me. The truth of the matter is, the world operates, doesn't it, on a basis of reward and deprivation. Reward, good activities, and depriving you of bad activities. For instance, if you take the staff of the institutes. Clear example. What are our rewards? Well, number one, when we do our job well, we're rewarded with a salary. It isn't much of a salary, and very low down on the list, but enough to survive, keep body and soul together, which is what the staff requires. A greater reward for the staff, of course, is the love and respect of each other. The staff's love and respect for each other, which is very, very high. Let's personalize it to me. A very important thing to me is the love and respect I have from the staff, which I richly return. That's a very high reward from me. And then another reward is a very great reward, which I treasure, is the love and respect of a lot of parents for kids around the world, and even some well kids around the world. That's very important to me. And the better I do my job, the higher all the rewards get. And then, of course, there's the reward to end all rewards. The reward that's worth it all. The reward that's worth all the maniacs screaming hysterically who haven't got the foggiest notion what they're screaming about. And that is watching a child, 15-year-old child, maybe walk across a room for the first time in his life, or a 10-year-old child talk for the first time in his life, or a child who spent his life writhing and getting his arms wrapped around his neck and his legs wrapped around his neck, watching that child. Well, last week, within this week, last Wednesday was the happiest day of my life. Last Wednesday I saw something that I had spent my life dreaming about. You know those writhing kids that everybody calls cerebral palsy? In great agonies of movement, if they can walk at all, your heart's in your mouth watching them. So when they talk, if they talk like this. You know what I mean? You know, they get worse and worse and worse. Historically, when they're children, they look like everybody else. They get worse and worse and worse and worse, consumed by respiratory problems. They get worse and worse and more rigid, and eventually die of not being able to breathe. And by the time they're 15, they look like identical twins to each other. If you took one of those kids, you took a 15-year-old Zulu Athetoid and a 15-year-old Parisian one, and a 15-year-old Bronx one, and a 15-year-old Dublin one, and a 15-year-old Spanish one, and a 15-year-old Eskimo one, and put them together, they look like identical twins, because their faces are so like each other, and their writhing so like each other, the color disappears. I mean, it's just so. It's obviously a very secondary characteristic to faces that look like. You all know what I mean? Well, this week, well, within a week, last Wednesday, we had 3 of those kids here from Italy, 3 big ones from Italy. All their parents are doctors. 5 doctor parents among 3 kids. Favorite kids of mine. Anyway, Doug announced I wasn't allowed to see them until they told me So he told me I could see them. I was allowed in my office, and something was going on in the boardroom. I had an idea I was going to get a present from Italy. That was what was in my mind, that they'd all chipped together to buy me a Venetian ashtray or something. And instead of that, when I was allowed in the room, I walked into the room, and here was 16-year-old Ferruccio and 13-year-old Simone standing in a headstand, a 3-point head and 2 hands, beautifully arched bodies. You understand, these kind of kids beautifully arched bodies and headstand. And Dr. Pligler and I walked in and said, wow! And this, of course, was my present. And we both said, golly, holy mackerel, look at that. Beautiful, looked like Olympic stars. And so they stood in their heads. And Ralph said, you know, what a lovely present. And I said, what a lovely present, thank you very much. Parents are all sitting around the board table, and the kids are standing on their heads. And we said, well, you know, that's wonderful. It keeps kind of getting down like this and say, Simone, you're marvelous, you know. Lucio, you're grand. They stood in their heads. And Ralph said, are you about to break the world's record for standing on your head? You know, it's wonderful, but haven't we ought to talk, at which time they pushed up to a handstand, muscled up to a handstand, tucked their heads in and rolled out of this, and like Olympic stars. I had assigned them each a different assignment the last time I saw them. The greatest problem with them is their voices. They don't have breath control. If you say count to 10, and then they're out of breath. This is classical. Anybody who's ever seen one knows this to be so. I had assigned Ferruccio that he was to learn to sing. And I had assigned to Simone, who's this way, that she was to play the piano. We have a videotape of Simone singing Adeste Fideles, 10 times better than I could sing it. Every word beautifully pronounced, large volume, and on tune. I can pronounce the words, I can yell loud, I cannot carry a tune. And here is he playing the piano, and singing, and Simone playing the piano. Imagine those hands playing the piano. Beautifully. We've got them both on videotape. If the Cerebral Palsy Society saw that, they'd put a bomb under his car hood and my car hood. It is the ultimate insult to all the spastic societies in the world and all the cerebral palsy societies in the world. Precisely. No, that isn't the first thing they'd say if they saw the film. The first thing they'd say is they were never cerebral palsy. They didn't have the disease in the first place. If you then showed them photographs from their doctor parents, then it was going to happen anyway. The same people who said nothing in the world can solve the problem. It's absolutely true. At any rate, now, in the law for children, I propose to you that the law should operate this way. If we say to the parents of such children that it's time for the law, they're inclined to say, you mean my hurt child, my hurt 3-year-old? You know, he's not well enough to impose a law. He isn't well enough to do that. You know, let's consider that. You know that Pavlov proved long ago. You can take a dog. I've had dogs all my life. You can take a dog, and I can train my dog after she's been out barking all day and protecting me from squirrels and robins and things like that valiantly. She comes running in at night. You know that if I arrange for, if she touches the wall at this side of the room, she gets a mild shock. And if she touches the wall at this side of the room, she gets fed. And you know, I've had brilliant dogs and I've had idiot dogs. They're a lot like, I had a Greek Dane that had a hard time learning to feed. He was real dumb. But mostly I've had collies and most of them have been very bright. But you know, an average dog, it might take 8 times for them to learn what I want them to do, which is, I don't want you to touch that wall, and I do want you to touch this wall. Okay? Would you agree that anybody doubt that you could quickly teach an average dog to, this is desirable and this is undesirable? My reward is to watch Ferruccio stand on his head and watch Simone play the piano. The better I do my job, the more I'm rewarded. The more kids I see do that. The less well I do my job, the less I'm rewarded. The fewer kids I see do that. That's my big reward. Okay? But that's what we all operate on. Reward for what the world sees being good and deprivation for what the world sees being bad. Now, so I say, okay, dog, your version of this is, I don't want you to touch that wall, and I do want you to touch this wall, and every time you touch this wall, you get fed. Do you agree with that? Suppose I did that. Suppose I took my dog and did that.
And every night after his hard day work guarding my fence line, as Robert Ardrey says, he running up and down my fence line for the same reason I built it. And there he is guarding the perimeter of our territory. And then at night he comes dashing in, turns left, jumps in the wall, and gets fed. Suppose I did that for 2 years, okay? Every day for 2 years. And in his dog memory, it's a long time since he ever touched that wall. He just knows you don't touch that wall. The law is you don't touch this wall, you do touch this wall, right? Then I decided, I think I'm going to have some fun. I think I'm going to reverse it. And I'm going to make this wall the one you get fed at, and this wall the one you get a shock. But now I'm going to have some fun. I'm going to make the food even better and the shock a little stronger. And so my dog comes running in, end of his day, he's done his job well, and turns left and dashes down, jumps up in the wall and gets a shock. Now, even my dog, I mean, he is real bright compared to the hurtest brain-injured child I've ever seen. He's not in the same league as the hurtest brain-injured child I've ever seen. But can't you even my dog, looking at me and saying, hey, what the devil's going on? I mean, you know, you and I have had a deal, God, all our lives. I run in, I jump on this wall, I get fed. What the devil's this? Way back in his dog brain, there's some ancient stirring of having had that happen down there. Very vague, a long time ago. Can't you see him saying, by the way, you'd have to be pretty unkind to do that, don't you think? But suppose you did do that, okay? Now, what's going to happen now? Do you think he's going to say, I'll bet he switched walls, I'll go jump on this wall. Nothing good ever happened to that wall in his whole life. All he associates with that wall is you don't do it. You don't do it. This wall, this is the one. In the end, you know what I think he'd do? I think he'd jump up again on this wall and get knocked down again. I think he might 3 or 4. He has never gotten food ever in his life except from this wall. I think it'd be a long time and many shocks before that dog would say, you know, maybe, just maybe, that wall. And you can see with what trembling he'd approach it, having never gotten anything good from it, before he had learned that this wall was the wall. Huh? Anyway, I do that. And he's learned this wall's the wall, you never touch that wall. Another 2 years go by. And now I think I'm going to have even more fun. Now I'm going to put it on a random basis. Sometimes it's this wall, sometimes it's this wall. And by the way, we're going to increase the shock a bit, and we're going to increase the food a bit. And so he comes dashing in the first night. Now I summarize what we're talking about. We're talking about what the law is. We're talking about what motivates creatures. And we're talking about how to do that and how not to do it. It may seem a bit random to you. Trust me to tie it together in this period. I'm proposing to you that it would be the height of cruelty to train a dog to find that his reward for good behavior, which was always here, and a fine, as it were, a punishment there, or deprivation there, to reverse that. And then, if 2 years later I reversed it again, and this time made it random. Not even I knew which was going to be which. The dog comes in the first day, having done his hard day's work, turns to the right, which he has done for 2 years, jumps up on the wall, and gets fed. Because it randomly, it turned out right this time. Next day, same thing. Dashes in, dashes down the wall, jumps up, gets fed. And the food is improved. The quality of the food is improved. He's very happy. The next day, comes in, runs down the end of the room, jumps up to get his food, but this time, randomly, it's set to give him a shock, a greater shock than before. Indeed, knocks him down. Can't you see the dog saying, what the devil's going on? I mean, you can't change the law on me. You have no right to change the law on me. What is happening? I've been a good dog every day. I've guarded the fence line. I've kept out the chipmunks. And here I am, and what kind of reward is this? Now what does he do? Because now the punishment is substantial. Substantial. But remember, as an adult dog, this happened to him once before. We switched the rules. With fear and trembling, perhaps in his dog brain, he says, for a long time, it was that wall. Maybe it's happened again. And so, with great fear and trembling, he goes down the other wall and jumps up and gets knocked down again, because randomly it was set to do that. Do you know what's going to happen to him? First of all, if you wanted to create an insane dog, can you imagine a better way to create a crazy dog than to change the law? In the end, if the shock creative, you know what he'll do, don't you? He'll lie down in the middle of the room and starve to death. So if you want an insane, starved dog, that'd be a good way to, by changing the laws. Now, can I propose to you that with our children we change the laws all the time? All the time, all the time, all the time. Let's look at it in a reality, but a little extreme, but in the reality. I come home from work one night and golly, everything's gone right. Everything, all day long, all the plans I've made for 12 years seem to be maturing, and I am happy, 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 happy. And I say, Glenn, you deserve to relax. Sit down, pour yourself a drink, and get the newspaper and sit and read the newspaper. And so I pour myself a drink, I sit in my comfortable chair and open the newspaper. At which time my 2-year-old comes bouncing into the room, saying, ta-da, here I am. You know? Here I am, Daddy. But I'm reading the newspaper and rewarding myself, so I say, hi, kid, go back to my newspaper. That doesn't suit him. He wants more than that. So he comes over, and I'm just reading my newspaper and having my drink, and he hits the newspaper. And I say, now, kiddo, don't do that. Dad's reading the newspaper. And that doesn't last long. He comes over and hits the newspaper again. But I'm in a marvelous mood. Everything went magnificently. Huh? So 17 times he hits the newspaper, and 17 times I say, don't do that, kid. Daddy's reading the newspaper. The 18th time, I haul off and wallop him one in the seat of the pants. I have just taught him a new game. Here's the new game. Daddy's reading the newspaper, I'm supposed to come in, and I'm supposed to hit the newspaper 17 times. Not 18, 17. 18 I'm not supposed to do. So he's learned a new game, and I taught him. The next day I go to work, and everything that was turned into pearls yesterday falls apart. None of it happened. None of it. And I go home, and I'm devastated. And I say, Glenn, boy, you've had a rough day. You deserve a double drink and a long time sitting undisturbed reading your newspaper. So I sit down to read my newspaper, having poured myself a double Irish whiskey, and there I sit reading my newspaper. And the 2-year-old comes in and says, ta-da, and I pay no attention at all this time. I'm upset and engrossed in my newspaper. So he decides to play the game. He comes over and hits the newspaper, and I wallop him in the seat of the pants. Don't you think he has a right to say, hey, what's the deal, Jack? I mean, I'm supposed to come hit the newspaper 17 times, not 18. 17. I was only going to hit it 17 times a night, not 18. But I hit it once, and you wallop me. You know, all the things we do in dealing with children, if we did them with adults, we'd have a revolution. An absolute, total, complete revolution. Suppose, the law is capricious, it's unannounced, it's unpublished, it's capricious, and totally unpredictable. What would happen with us? Let's just suppose that I drove out the driveway here and drove right on Stanton Avenue down the bottom of the hill where the light is on Paper Mill Road. And suppose the light were green, and I start through, and suppose a policeman blew his whistle furiously and blew me down, and I said, what's the matter? And suppose he said, well, you went through the green light. And suppose I said, you're supposed to go through the green light. And he said, no, I changed my mind. Now you stop on green, and you go on read, you'd say you're a maniac. You can't do that. I mean, you can't change the law without telling me. Especially if you never changed the law in the first place. See, the law is to give each of us the maximum freedom without leaning on each other. The law is a sign of civilization. It's a sign of great respect. We human beings have this need in us for the law. We civilized human beings have this need for the law. I often think, suppose I washed up on a desert island somewhere, and suppose I searched the whole island over and found out I was the only human being there, just me and the crabs on the beach and the seagulls. The first thing I'd say is, hey, what's the law around here? What's the law around here? I mean, what are you allowed to do and what are you not allowed to do? And I'd have to write a set of laws for myself. If I didn't, I'd end up a seagull or a crab on the beach. It's the English have always known this. They have done it to a fare thee well. Some Englishman, he's in the middle of the Sahara Desert, just him and his camel and his tin. And at 3 o'clock, he brews up some tea. He puts his coat on and necktie and brews up some tea. It's tea time. And I mean, who's there except him and the camel? And the answer is nobody. But either he puts on his coat and necktie, or in the end he becomes a camel. Do you see what I mean? That they have sort of carried it to the nth degree of keeping up being human beings, of being human beings in the highest sense of the word. I remember once, the only time I saw good manners do a disservice, one time early in World War II, we were going to occupy an island in the Pacific, which the British had always occupied. And we knew that the British drove on the left side of the road. So we trained all our truck drivers to drive on the left side of the road. The British, knowing we were coming to occupy it, trained all their drivers to drive on the right side of the road. Now everybody's driving on the wrong side of the road, and vehicles coming at each other head on. It was touch and go there for a while. But see, that was a civilized attempt to do something civilized, to announce the law. Let me ask a question. Think about this a bit. Who do you think would have the greatest respect for the law? Linus Pauling, who has 2 Nobel Prizes, or a common criminal? Who do you think would have most respect for the law? Linus Pauling, sure. Lots of time people say the common criminal. Obviously, the common criminal has no respect for the law. He's an outlaw. Linus Pauling has great respect. The common criminal fears the law. The criminal fears the law. The civilized human being respects the law. The criminal fears the law and has right to do so. We make laws to protect ourselves from each other. We've lived here now for, 40 years in Chestnut Hill, 10 years most of the time, and 30 years all of the time. And up on the top of the next hill, there's traffic light. And many times coming home from teaching somewhere or other, I have come to that light at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's red. And I sit at the light, and I can see a mile down Paper Mill Road this way and a mile this way, and I sit there. I feel a little foolish sitting there, since a car going 400 miles an hour could hit me if I went. But in the end, I sit there, because if I decide to do it on my own judgment, sooner or later I'll race a fire engine to the intersection at high noon, and 6 people will die, at least 5 of them won't be me, and in the end, the Brazilians, who are among my favorite people in the whole world, their attitude toward traffic lights is they consider them sort of guidance system, sort of an advisory system. If it's red, you ought to go slow. Slow down to 40 if it's red. An awful lot of people get killed in Brazil in automobiles. An awful lot of people get killed in automobiles in Brazil. It is to protect us from each other. And so at 3 o'clock in the morning, in the end, I sit there. Now, I didn't used to. When I was young, before the whole German army tried to kill me, and they were very professional about it, I used to try to kill myself once in a while. I remember when I was very young in New Jersey, one Sunday,
I was driving very fast, very, very fast, and a car behind me kept blowing the horn at me, and I couldn't believe he wanted to pass me at 85. But he kept blowing the horn and staying right behind me and blowing the horn. And looking in the rear vision mirror, I could see him doing this. And so it occurred to me by and by, maybe I'd better pull over to the side. And it was a plain car with a plainclothes guy who was a sergeant of Jersey State Police. And he said to me, "You know, son, something happened to me today that never happened to me before." And I said, "What was that, officer?" And he said, "Well, I was chasing a car for speeding, and you passed both of us," said him. And so I used to test the law back in those days, as many young men are inclined to test the law to see if it operates or not, you know. And so I had a lot of experience with policemen. And interesting experience with policemen. For instance, Pennsylvania State Police in those days, maybe still, were very famous for this. One time, at a place called Moscow, PA, a long time ago, it's outside of Scranton, PA, there was a wide brick road, a red brick road, not yellow, red. And very, very wide. It was Sunday morning, and I was going like the devil. And the state policeman stopped, Pennsylvania State Policeman. And they were absolutely famous for their great courtesy. He said to me, "Golly, isn't it a dreadful temptation to speed on this road? I always feel like speeding here. It's so wide and no traffic on Sunday mornings, straight, and very, very, very tempting, and I certainly understand." They were famous for that. They were also famous for the fact that they always gave you a ticket. So while he was being sympathetic, he was writing the ticket all the time. And every time I ever met a Pennsylvania State Policeman, he was very, very polite, writing the ticket. And you know, every time that happened to me, I'd say to myself, you know, I really shouldn't do that. I really shouldn't speed. And very often I wouldn't for quite a while. It always made me say I shouldn't have done it. Every once in a while, I met a policeman who wasn't a Pennsylvania State Policeman, who, when he stopped me, had a temper tantrum and screamed at me and jumped up and down and insulted me, etc., etc. And sooner or later, I'd say to him, "Buster, knock it off. If you're going to give me a ticket, give it to me. And don't insult me, because that's not your job. Your job is to give me a ticket if I need one. But shut up." I could rarely afford it, by the way. Sometimes it could cost me a month's salary. But in the end, I found out that I would rather pay an inordinate amount of money than be abused by a policeman. And by the way, when that happened to me, I always found myself saying, I shouldn't have gotten caught. Not that I shouldn't have done it, but that I shouldn't have gotten caught. And both of those things happened to me often enough, so that I became convinced that when somebody was polite to me, I tended to understand the lesson. And when somebody was rude to me, I tended to conclude that I shouldn't have gotten caught. Can we talk about kids now, please, and how we might wisely deal with them? Can I first point out to you how laws happen, and why the various components of a law are necessary? Can I make an assumption? Can I assume that you are the Philadelphia City Council? Okay, you're Philadelphia City Council, and I'm a resident of Philadelphia. I have an office in downtown Philadelphia on Walnut Street. But you know, the center, Philadelphia is a very old city by American standards, at any rate. We had our 300th birthday some time ago. By American standards, that's very old. And downtown was built for foot traffic and horses and very narrow carriages. So the main streets in the center of downtown Philadelphia are very narrow. They are 3 lanes wide. I mean, literally 3 cars abreast fill the street with inches between the cars. Let's suppose I had an office down 6th and Walnut, let's say, in the center of old Philadelphia. And skyscrapers all around, by the way, in these narrow little streets. Suppose that I had an office there, and suppose that I noticed that it took me 2 hours to get to work, and 2 hours to get home. The reason being that there was only 1 lane operating because everybody parked on both sides of the street. Indeed,
suppose I always went to work early in the morning so I could park in front of my office. And I'd always done that for 20 years that I've had the office. I'd park in front of my office. But the result is it takes 2 hours to get in because now only one lane of traffic is moving in the middle with cars parked on both sides. And 2 hours get in, 2 hours get out. That's a lot of time spent in travel when I only live in Chestnut Hill, huh? So I go to City Council. Let's see, who would like to be president of City Council? You're president of City Council, okay? President of City Council, I come to you and I have a problem. I say to you, you know, President, it takes me 2 hours to get to work and it takes me 2 hours to get home. And that bugs me. It's just plain too long. And I pay taxes here, and I really want you to do something about it, or perhaps I'll move away. And if I move away, the tax base in Philadelphia will go down, and what are you going to do about it? So you have a meeting with the City Council, and you say this guy came and complained. It seems a justifiable complaint. It is a long time to get to work, and a long time to get home. And so what do you intend to do about that? President Esposito says to all of you. What do you say now? What do you propose? Eliminate parking. That seems I'm sure there are many proposals, but certainly eliminate the parking would be a reasonable proposal. Do you not think so? City Council, you buy that? President Esposito? Buy that? A reasonable thing. Ms. Guinness? Yes, but if you don't do it, there isn't any way, is there? I mean, if you don't, you can't speed things up if you're going to have cars on both sides of the street. And after much discussion, what's going to happen about it? And by the way, you do talk about it, and as a matter of fact, there's plenty of parking space in commercial buildings 2 blocks away, and you've encouraged everybody. As a matter of fact, the Philadelphia Rapid Transit System, what it used to be called, is not bad. Public transportation is not bad. And so it doesn't have to be this way. So the City Council passes a law and says, okay, no parking. Now, what else do you have to do?
Post the sign.
Yeah, you've got to publish it, don't you? You've got to tell me. If you don't tell me, suppose you don't tell me. And suppose I go, park where I've been parking for 20 years. I come out, and a policeman is writing a ticket. And I say, what are you doing, Jack? And he says, you're not allowed to park here. And I say, since when? Since when? I don't see any sign now, even. Since when? You can't do that to me. I'd be indignant, would I not? You can't pass a law and not tell me about it. So you have to publish the law is really what it boils down to in newspapers. Television, put signs up saying this is going to happen, signs up. So, now, suppose I go down this and the cops give me a ticket, and I say, hey, what's going on here? And he says, oh, some jerk complained about how long it takes to get down the street, and so there's no parking now. Some clown complained about it. That's me, remember. I complained about it. I'm about to have some infringement on me from the law that I insisted on having, you see. Or suppose the cop says, is this your car? And then he has a temper tantrum and screams at me, you're not what kind of citizen are you? And he has a temper tantrum. And then he takes out his pistol and shoots me through the head. That seems a little much, don't you think? It's, first of all, how can you avoid all those things? Well, first of all, you pass the law. Now, you can't pass a law without writing something else in the law. What else do you have to write in the law? Yeah. You're allowed to break the law provided you only put up with punishment. So you've got to write that in, don't you? Now, let's suppose there's never been a parking law on Chestnut Street before, Walnut Street before. So you're going to write in a fine. Okay? How about $700 fine for parking? Seems a little much? A little much. How about shooting through the head summarily, right? That seems a little extreme too, doesn't it?
It has to be appropriate.
Exactly. It has to be appropriate. Now, what does that mean, that it has to be appropriate? What does it mean? What is appropriate? How about 14 cents? Is that appropriate?
Yes.
What?
Height.
How? Yes. So if you made it excessive, shooting me through the head, or $700, that's a bit much. If you make it too little, everybody will break the law. So what would the ideal fine be? Don't tell me amount of money, but just enough. Exactly. Would you all agree to that? That the fine ought to be just enough to prevent it from happening. Do you agree that, wouldn't that be right? Because the purpose of fines is not to extract money from the citizenry, but to prevent the crime from being committed. Do we agree? Oh, by the way, there are bad laws and there are good laws. I know some little towns on major highways where the industry is arresting speeders. We put up a sign saying 8 miles an hour, and somebody goes, 10, you're arrested. In Williamsburg once, I got arrested for speeding, and I said I was going 10 miles an hour. And they said, that's right, the speed law is 5 miles an hour. So I got arrested. Seemed appropriate in Williamsburg, it might be 5 miles an hour. But at any rate, so the fine ought to be just enough to prevent it from happening. Do you agree? And you have to write that into the law as well, do you not? All righty. What else do you have to do? Now you've published the law, you've said what the fine is. What else? You have to enforce it, don't you? You have to enforce it. All righty. Let's suppose you propose $5. You buy that, President Esposito, as a beginning? Okay. So you write a law, you publish it, say $5 parking fine. So I come down, I see the sign, and I say, okay, yeah, at least the street's open, and it is. It's open. But it is inconvenient for me. I have to really walk 4 blocks to that parking lot that Mrs. Guinness wanted. And by the way, the charge for parking at the parking lot all day is $5. So I get to think about that, and I think it's cost me $5 to park in front of my office all day. It cost me $5 to walk to the parking lot. I think I'll park in front of my place all day, which I do. And it only cost me $5 a day. Pretty soon there are 2 lines of parked cars, and it takes me 2 hours to get to work again, and I'm back where I was. But except now it costs me $25 a week to pay the parking or the fine, and I'm back where I was. So I come back to City Council. I say, hey, President Esposito, what the devil's the matter with City Council? It still takes me 2 hours to get to work and back, and now it costs me $25 a week. What is President Esposito going to do now? Might do that. That's getting heavy. What would be the first reasonable thing to do? Gee, that'd be nice. Oh, that'd be nice. Evan Thomas, who is one of perhaps the most brilliant human being I ever met, was an anarchist. And he and I used to have huge arguments. And because he was so much smarter than I, he always won. And I'd say, right, the best government would be no government at all. You're right. And then he'd say, of course, it always bothers me about who would put out the fires. Or, if there were no fire department, and who'd take care of crime if there were no police department. In the end, he would undo his own arguments. She's brilliant. Right? Yeah, that'd be nifty. That would be nifty. If everybody had enough sense. And by the way, if everybody alive were Evan Thomas, then anarchy would work. I mean, we could have that kind of, if we were all that bright and that wonderful. That'd be ideal. And it's where we ought to be headed. For now, don't you think we ought to raise the fine a bit? Let's say to $15 a week. Now I have my choice. I can walk 3 blocks and pay $75 a week, or park in front of my place and pay $15. So now I decide to obey the law, and that law is work. Now, can I propose, what does all that mean to your child? Here's what I propose. I propose that your house ought to work not on Daddy's temperament and how he feels today, not on some set of rules set down by a bachelor psychologist. Mothers get leaned on, it seems to me, and they get leaned on heavily. Mother reads an article in the Ladies' Home Journal that says, spare the rod and spoil the child. You ought to beat him 6 times a week, whether he needs it or not. And mother says, that doesn't sound right to me, but I'm only a mother, and he's a PhD, or a child developmentalist says that. And then she reads another article in Ladies' Home Journal saying, never put a finger on your child or he'll grow up to hate your gaudy guts and you'll ruin his little ego. And mothers say that doesn't sound right either. I have a strong suspicion that all mothers could forget all things that all professional people ever said to them, including me. And every time, no matter what anybody says, she feels she ought to hang one on the seat of his pants. She hangs one on the seat of his pants, no matter what anybody says. And every time she feels like picking him up in her arms and loving him, no matter what anybody says, if she did so, that she'd be right 99% of the time. And I don't know any professional, anybody who's right about anything 99% of the time, including me. But there's some chance of bullying mothers out of that. Let's talk about how we might have a reasonable law. A reasonable law. First of all, let's propose this. Let's propose that you're going to come and write a law for your kid. The law number 1 in the Mancini household. Law number 1. First of all, you and your husband sit down and talk it over. Now, let's talk about the things you can't do by passing a law. You can't make a kid do something you can't do by passing a law. For instance, if you were the parents of hurt kids, you can't make a non-walking kid walk by saying there's a law that says you have to walk. And by the way, it's very foolish to make a law that's not enforceable, because then you teach people to break the law, and that's a dumb beginning. So you go home and say, what is it that we want? And mother says, well, I'll tell you, I've got a proposal. He pulls all the books out of the house and puts them all over the floor 3 times a day. And it takes me a half hour every time he does it to put all the books back in the bookcase. So I think we ought to have a law that says you're only allowed to take 1 book at a time out of the bookcase. You got to put it back before you take out the next one. And Dad says, yeah, you do spend a lot of time cleaning up the floor, and that doesn't seem fair. So let's pass a law saying that. Now, can I propose something to you? Can I propose you do it the formal way, the city council way? That, first of all, you sit down and write the law. And the law says that nobody in the Mancini household takes the second book out of the library before they put the first one back. And by the way, Mr. Mancini is inclined to leave the books out a little bit too. He doesn't put them on the floor, but he often takes out 3 and leaves them on the table. So you pass a law, and the law has got to be equal for everybody. For instance, let's suppose I come out of my office one day after we have the parking law, and there's a big car sitting there, and a policeman's standing there, and there's no ticket on it. And I say, hey, Buster, what's that car parked in front of my office for? And no ticket. He says, oh, that car belongs to President Esposito of the Philadelphia City Council. And I say, devil that. That's she's the one that passed the law, for Pete's sake. See, everybody has to obey the law. Everybody, without fear or favor. We must enforce the law, or people stop upholding it. But first, everybody's got to obey. So Mr. Mancini is going to have to put his books away too, or be prepared to pay the fine, whatever the fine is. Okay. So here we go, and we have now law number 1, Mancini household. Can I propose that you publish it? Can I propose that you publish it? Maybe a little silver trumpet, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, hear ye, hear ye. Here is law number 1, Mancini household, posted by the front door. And then, by the way, everybody that comes in, especially grandparents,
You say, hey, read the law in the Mancini household. Not that I expect Grandpop to pull out the books and throw them on the floor. What I do expect is when Johnny pulls them out and throws them on the floor, and we're about to impose the fine, and Grandmom and Grandpop say, oh, you can't do that to poor Billy. And by the way, especially if he's hurt. Especially if he's hurt. Especially if he's hurt. Grandparents are either the best thing that ever happened to kids, or the only answer for them is a large dose of arsenic. I mean, if they decide they're going to save the kid from you, then a large dose of arsenic quickly applied is a good idea to grandparents. If they decide they're going to help you fix the kid, then they are the greatest allies the world has ever seen. And you might bear that in mind. It's also true with well kids. So when the grandparents come, you say, hey, read this. And remember, this is the Mancini household, and we hope everybody obeys the laws here, and we hope you will. If you don't go away mad, just go away. We'll visit you. And in your house, we'll do what you want. But this is the Mancini house, and this is law number one. Now, what happens now? Well, let's say it takes the Mancini kid 6 tries to learn. Good Lord, not more than 6. I could teach my Cully in 8, okay? 6 times. Now, when it happens, and this is, no, let me come back to it. 6 times it takes them to learn. All right, now, it's working, everything's fine, it's operating, everything's going great. Now then, you say it's time for the second law. And Dad says, okay, I'll tell you what drives me nuts. He picks his nose all the time. That drives me nuts. Now, the truth is, everybody picks their nose, but there are certain things you do in private. And picking your nose ought to be one of them. And so you decide, he says, he looks like an idiot when he sits there picking his nose and eating it sometimes. And it drives me up the wall, and I'm not going to have that anymore. Well, that's fair. I mean, you can decide that in our house, if you want to pick your nose, you go in the bathroom to pick your nose. You go in the bathroom to do other things, so why don't you go in the bathroom and pick your nose too? And so you decide that's the second law, and again you publish it, and again you put it on the wall. By the way, if it took him 6 times to learn that law number 1 is possible, he ought to learn that law number 2 is possible in 3 times. Providing you don't keep changing the law on him, and providing that you every time enforce the law. Every single solitary time. And now it's time for law number 3. He ought to teach the second time. All he had to learn was, is it possible? He already knows about law, doesn't he? The only thing he had to learn, is it possible to have more than one law? And now, the only thing he has to learn, is it possible to have many laws? By the way, I tested several of the laws. I tested the no parking law. I tested the speeding law. Once in a while, I tested the red light law. And in the end, I decided that I didn't have to test all the laws. Well, I never tested the murder law. I've been tempted on many occasions, but haven't. Because I'm sure the law would catch up to me. I didn't have to test them all to know that the law worked. Now, you may well say to me, didn't you ever speed and not get caught? Or go through a red light and not get caught? Yeah, I did. Isn't that sad for me? I mean, it took me longer to learn. I increased my chance of getting killed. Do you see what I mean? Wouldn't it have been nice if I got caught every time? Because I've learned something. Everybody follow it? With your child, you must never, ever, ever, and especially if your kid's hurt. See, suppose it's going to take them 8 times to achieve hurt, and that's the first law. And you adore him. You'd die for him cheerfully. You'd cheerfully die for him. I've known 15,000 parents who would cheerfully die if they were did well. So, and you would cheerfully die. So he breaks the law, and you give him the fine, whatever it is. And he does again, you don't know if it's going to take 8 times to teach him, okay? 7 times you do it. And the 8th time you say, oh, he hasn't, my dear little boy had enough problems without me doing this. I'll just let him get away with it 1 time. You are back to square number 1, you know, right? You have just a dirty, dirty trick on him. Huh? Do you see what I mean? Like changing the law on the dog.
What a dirty trick that would be. You're just changed it, and that's a dirty trick. Okay, now you've got law number 3. Now it'll take one time or no time. But law number 4, you just announced this is law number 4. Providing 2 things. See if this sounds familiar. I'm just so sane. It is the way I would like to be dealt with. As a matter of fact, it's the way I insist on being dealt with. But if any policeman changed the law on me, I'd have a temper tantrum. And if you treated me rudely, I'd rather pay a large fine that I can't afford than be treated rudely and be screamed at. You see what I'm saying, don't you? It is a sane, humane, nice way to deal with each other, to have a law that protects us from each other and gives us each the maximum freedom we can have. And then if I want to be protected, I'm going to be prepared to pay a small price myself of not doing it either. See where I follow me? So when the child does something like that, you say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. What a great shame it is." Oh, I'm so sorry that you have to pay a fine. What a shame that you have to pay a fine. And not, therefore, you shouldn't do it again. That's follow. I mean, he knows that. If he's 2, he knows that. You don't have to say there. You don't have to underline the lesson. If the lesson is 100% consistent, then he's underlining it. It's the act itself. Do you see what I mean? It is only that it becomes unclear if you put something in between the crime and the fine. Only then does it become unclear. See, I mean, it should be like the curtain and the string that you pull it down by. If I pull the string, the curtain comes down, and it's hard for me to pretend that I didn't have anything to do with it. With the curtain coming down, if I'm pulling the string, that's the way it should be. The punishment is tied to the curtain here. The string is the crime, and the punishment is the curtain, and they're tied together irreparably. And you're on his side, and you are so sorry. Okay? Do I hit myself there? Okay. What about the fine? Well, we've just... Oh, I've got a question for you. You've got law 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in your household, the Mancini household. Everything works beautifully. You pass the 9th law, kid understands it, never have to get punished once. But then he starts breaking law number 1. What's the problem? Well, I don't think so. Look how many there are for us. Why would he test? Why would he test to see if it's still in effect? I think it is true that we test. What's the solution of the problem? The fine isn't large enough. A price that he may not have been willing to pay before, he may now be willing to pay. I mean, the price may not appear as large now. He may be richer, as it were, and so he may test shorter. I mean, we all test now and then, don't we? We test each other's patience now and then, knowing we're skating on thin ice. We occasionally test each other's patience. We occasionally test each other's will. And so that's a natural enough thing. But it may be that he really wants to leave the books on the floor this particular day because he wants to go out sooner. And so he tests and says, even if I get punished, which I surely will, it's okay. It's worth it at this moment. See, let's suppose I'm going to work one day and I've got an extremely important appointment at 9 o'clock. And I've left home in plenty of time to get there by getting the traffic jam. I get down to my office, and it's now. The appointment's now. So I park my car in front of my office because I'm willing to pay the fine because in this circumstance it's so important that I'm willing to pay. And I haven't occasionally might have done that. Part hoping I didn't get caught, but being prepared to pay the fine if I did get caught because it was worth it. And haven't you all seen situations like that? So what it means is, if he does it, that you have to raise the fine. Something, because the fine should always be the least amount which was. Right? Ma'am? Sure, you might, if the law becomes obsolete. Sure. If your family wants to do that. By the way, can I propose that at a very young age, you take the kids into the law-making process? That at a very young... First, I would teach them about the law and get myself a series of laws, so we all obey it. And then I'd say, guess what, kid? At the next meeting of the Mancini Family Council, where you're going to be part of the council, and you get to voice your opinion. Not necessarily to impose your opinion, but you get to voice it. We get to hear it.
How about warning? You just write a law, it's ready to, how about a warning first before you actually enforce it?
You can do it if you want. I think it is a fudge about not doing it at all. I think it's a fudge. And see, what you're trying to, with adults, what you're trying to do is enforce the law. With the kid, you're trying to teach him the law. And if you want to learn about the law, you shouldn't learn that it's the law more or less, or the law sometimes. Can I propose that you teach him the law first, and then maybe in your house one day you can say, okay, from now on there's a warning period, which we do. But first they ought to learn about the law in its clearest form, in its absolute form, in my opinion.
But what if law isn't good for anyone? What if it's for everyone?
Well, you don't pass a law. See,
What if it's not like that kind of, you
Sure.
need to get like 10 o'clock and that's okay, it's a good law that you know is good for the state.
Oh,
You don't know?
I don't think there's anything wrong with city council agreeing to waive the law for this period of time. I think that's fine. But I don't think you do it without discussion, without warning. In Philadelphia, sometimes the law has changed for a short period of time. During the Mummers Parade, you're not allowed to park certain places, and you are allowed to park other places that you're not normally allowed. Sure, I think the law belongs to you. The law is the law of the people. And we, the people, get to change the law, and we get, it should work for us, the law. If it doesn't work for us, then it's done. See, the purpose of the law is never to discipline. Discipline is the failure of the law. Occurs when the law isn't working, when the law is wrong. And so I believe, of course, we all have the right to change the laws to suit ourselves. But if you're going to play the family game, then it ought to be the family who decide. Ms. Karen?
Suppose, like you say, they sit in that clock, the time they want to go straight and not.
Yeah. Well, if you're going to make them equal partners, that's the thing. I'm not sure I would make them equal partners. They don't know as much as you do. Huh? But partners and part of the voice. You know, I don't get to vote in the U.S. Senate. I'd like to, but I don't. I get to state my opinion. The senators get to vote.